Hi, everyone. I hope that you're all fine. We're waiting just for a wee second to see as people are pouring in, but we should be live and okay. It would be great if you see us, just give us a thumbs up in the chat because it's the first time that we're using this technology. So it'd be lovely to know that it's all going perfectly and that we don't have to worry. And I think we're ready to start in about a minute or two. So it's your last chance to go and grab a cup of coffee if you want to. And if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, feel free to do so. There we go, the numbers are going up. And lovely seeing Bruce, seeing all this, so many people. This is really exciting. I think that we're probably ready to go. 76 people. What do you think, guys? Thumbs up? Right, so we're ready to go and we'll get started. Now, let me just... So thank you everyone for being here. It's lovely to see you, and just gonna, if you give me 1 second, I'm gonna just remove one thing. Here we go. And we're ready to go. As you can see, it's the first time, so it's a bit more challenging. So it's great to have you all here today in this first of 3 in a series of agroforestry events. And today we're going to be focusing, as you all know, in the Croft. So that's really, really exciting for us. Feel free to tweet through the presentation or talk to each other using those hashtags we have there. And being 7:02, I think that we're ready to start. So as I mentioned, this is a series it's the first in a series of webinars. The first one is going to be all about your croft, and we have this amazing guests that Clem's going to introduce in a wee second. But afterwards, we're also going to be talking about farms and how to integrate trees in your farm business, both smaller homesteads and then also bigger farms. So we're more than invited, and we'd love it if you could come too. And the final one would be all about funding and income streams associated with agroforestry and how they can help your farm. So more than invited to be part of that. We would love to see you there. And also we would like to invite you to visit our Agroforestry Resources Hub. It's a special resource hub where we're putting together everything around both agroforestry and a little bit on woodland creation as well. We will be sharing all this information later, but it's part of this whole series of webinars, having a couple of resources as well for you to be able to access afterwards or in between events. We're not only having some events on agroforestry, we're also running a couple of events on mob grazing. So if you're interested in that, you can also subscribe or register to our mob grazing Q&A coming on the 4th of March, which is going to be touching on the topic of outwintering to reduce inputs. Really interesting one. So again, we're going to be sharing all this information, but it would be great if you could be with us in all those events. Just really short housekeeping. As you can see, we can't really see you. So if you want to talk to us, please use the regular chat, which is right here. You can use it to talk to each other, share ideas, any resources that you have. But the questions, we ask you to put them here in the Ask a Question area of the event. That will help us not only having all the questions in the same part, but you can actually upvote questions. So if you see a question that you already wanted to ask, you don't have to write it twice, just upvote it. It's really easy. It's just clicking on the question once you open it. So just for you to have an idea of how this is going to go, first, we're going to start with a couple of questions via Mentimeter. So if you could please go to menti.com if you're using your mobile and enter that code there, 832295.7, which is also going to be shared in the chat. If you could do that, or if you could go in the computer and use the link that we're going to be sharing on the chat, that would be brilliant. So we're going to start with a couple of questions just to have an idea of where you stand with agroforestry, if you're already planning something around it, if you just want to know something more. And then the second thing is going to be, after that, Clem's going to introduce our guests today. We're going to be talking with them a little bit about their farm, and then finally we're going to go back to your questions and answer them. So feel free to put the questions in the Q&A at any point during the conversation, but we'll address them, and probably we're going to be talking to our guests for around half an hour, 45 minutes, and then we're going to move into questions. So again, if you can open www.menti.com and enter the code 832295.7, that would be brilliant, and we can get started. So the first question is, we would love to know where you're coming from today. So if you could let us know, are you coming from Scotland, from England, from Wales, Northern Ireland, outside the UK? We would love to know where you're coming from today. I see 30, someone from outside the UK. That's great. Lots of people from Scotland, not surprisingly, but still lovely to know that you're there. I think that when we hit 40 in Scotland, we can move to the next question. I think we've done it. So moving to the next question, we would love to know if you manage an agroforestry project already, if you do, if you don't, if you're hoping to start, or maybe you're not really a farmer or a crofter, that's absolutely fine as well, and you're just interested in the topic. We would love to hear about you. Wow, look at that. Not many people have just started, so, and lots of people really looking forward to start. That's really great. Well, you get an awful lot of information from our experts today. Most of you wanting to start. That's really, really great. That's fantastic. Let's move to the next one then. What would you say are the main barriers that are stopping you from implementing agroforestry designs in your land? Would you say it's around funding? Would you say you don't really know where to start? Would you like to have more examples? Maybe you don't have enough examples and you don't feel confident. Maybe it's about the potential in your operations, maybe just a matter of land, or any other questions that you may have. And I see that there's a big chunk that's all about funding, so I think that the last of our webinars might be of interest. Knowing where to start, that's why we have our experts here today. Not enough land, I think that you're going to be probably quite interested then in learning what Phil and Mike and Claire have done in their crofts. So you're about to fill that void in a second. And I think that it's time that we actually start. So I'm going to move to Clem. Please don't close your Mentimeter just yet, because we do have a couple questions more towards the end of this presentation. So I would really appreciate it if you can just keep it open there. And I'm going to stop sharing and giving it back to Clem, who can actually start by presenting our guests.
Hi there, so I'm Clem Sanderson. I'm one of the farming and land use managers working with Anna at the Soil Association Scotland. We're really delighted to have you here this evening. So I'm going to kick off the conversation. We're going to be speaking to Phil Knott on Skye, and Claire Holworth and Mike Hyatt on Lismore. And they've got lots of exciting things to tell you about, and hopefully some of you caught their videos. They just made some little intro videos today that were shared on Twitter. but we'll be gathering all of the videos that they make on a YouTube playlist as well. So you'll be able to access those on the Agroforestry resource hub too. But yeah, let's kick off. I'll start with Phil. Phil, do you want to introduce your croft and maybe tell us a bit about how you got into crofting as well, just briefly?
Yeah, good evening, Clem. Thank you for having me along for this event. So our croft, we have a 3-hectare croft in Drumford on South Skye, so it's the neck of the Slate Peninsula. It's all slope. It's quite challenging ground. I'd say it sits on what is essentially Torridonian sandstone, quite boggy ground, quite difficult. So a nice challenge, which I liked. Crofting, we've got into when we bought the croft. That's how we've come into it. We started cold completely, and so that's just over 5 years ago now. We were looking for a bit of land, something to work on as a project, and we found a croft which already had an existing planting on it. It was quite rank, quite unmanaged, but we had trees that were 10 years old, and we always knew that the trees would be a part of it, not everything, but a part of what we were going to do. And so to have a head start, particularly on the west here, things take us that bit longer. So for the bigger picture and things, it was a great start for it. So as a croft, I've been learning as I've been doing, I think, as we all do, really. But with our 3 hectares and the fact that a lot of it was all in the trees, we were going to have to employ a different model from the outset, really. We weren't necessarily going to go down the more traditional route. We're going to look at diversification and see what we could use our shelter for. And so it's snowballed from there in a very positive way.
Great, thanks, Phil. I just realised I've also neglected to introduce Lynn White, who you can see on your screen as well, from Scottish Forestry. So just a little hello to Lynn. She's going to be around along with Iona later on if you've got any funding or grant inquiries. So that's why Lynn's there. Sorry, Lynn. So yeah, we'll move over to Mike and Claire. Would you like to introduce your croft and just tell us a bit about how you got into it?
Unmute us, or are we? Yeah, great. So we bought our croft in 2011, and in the winter of 2012, we started planting trees. There were only probably about 10 trees on the croft at 16 hectares, 42 acres, and it had some mature trees that had been planted around the old cottage, but the rest of it was just grazing. And we wanted to diversify into growing crops, etc. And shelter was the sort of key aspect that we wanted to introduce trees for initially, but also for lots of other reasons as well. So we planted a shelter belt in 2012, and we've been planting ever since. We've probably completed our sort of planting program, and it now covers about 45% of the croft. So we've been in the last couple of years, we've been funded by the Woodland Trust, which has really helped us, continue planting and probably do it quicker than we would have done otherwise. We always had an ambition to plant trees to a large extent, or after the initial shelter belts, it was for carbon capture and biodiversity. So I don't know, Claire, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I just like trees, and I just wanted to plant some. So I was like, yay, we've got some land, I can plant some trees. We made loads of mistakes. We had very little experience, despite the fact Mike's a landscape architect. Neither of us had farmed or crofted or anything like that. And I just have to say that you'll make many mistakes, but just take them as experiences that help you learn that you can't plant. So I planted 250 pounds worth of apple trees behind a flimsy little fence, and within 3 weeks the cows had just trampled it over and bitten off the top of my apple trees. And although they've recovered a bit in the last 10 years, they haven't really recovered fully. So you'll make lots of schoolboy errors in the process, and it's fine because it's the journey. That's what I want to say.
Great, thanks for that intro. Phil, could you tell us a bit about how you've planted trees and what value they bring to the croft for you?
So in the 5 years we've been here, although there was trees over a good bit of the croft, they were they were it's more of a sporadic planting. So it was done under what's probably sort of woodland grant scheme of the time. Not much local provenance within there, some kind of unusual choices, I would say, in the tree mix, and some trees probably in the wrong place as well, which has meant that a lot of them haven't done very well. A lot of them have died, and so it's given it quite a nice natural look, actually. It's not regimented. You can't see any kind of lines. It was mound planted when it was done, so they dug holes, must have been with a mini digger, and then planted on the soil. So there's the holes all over the crop. Some of them full of water, and some are not. A bit of a challenge at times. We've planted 3,000 more on top of that, which over 3 hectares is a lot. But that's front loading on the windward side, so really going kind of shelter heavy. So really kind of packing them in where we need them, just to kind of get them up and away, and then the rest of it a bit more sporadic. So I'd love to say it's all kind of neatly planned out. We have had hedges that we put in. We can speak about the Croft Woodland project, the More Hedges and More Woods scheme that we benefited from, and that makes up quite a lot of the numbers. But it's really quite a good number. You can't notice it so much once it's in the ground there. I mean, once you start putting one every metre or so for the dense shelter belts, then it soon absorbs the numbers. And for us, it's all about shelter as well. We don't want this to be a woodland. We don't want to live in a woodland. Woodland here on Skye is just going to be full of midges. I've got to be honest. It's not what you want. Shelter is great to a point, but we're in a very boggy area around here, and so the midges will just come to us for shelter, which is not ideal. So we want to have it shelter where we need shelter, and then more open where we need to have it more open. And like Mike as well, it's about 45% cover. That's what we're going for, and then managing the open areas that we've got for meadows. So at the moment we don't have stock, but we'll certainly make the most of what we've got. So making pollinator-rich meadows, grassland that's useful for us now, for biodiversity now, but also going forward, kind of future-proofing it a little bit when we do get stock, which we will get. And so, and in the pockets that are all over the croft, we're finding these little microclimates. We've given it time to get established. We've given it time to kind of see where all the best bits are, where the sun's kind of coming around, where the soil's actually pretty good already. And there we've planted in a lot of fruit trees and a lot of fruit bushes, just kind of underplanting essentially, not in a planned way. You can't necessarily go, this is our orchard here and this there. A lot of it is just kind of more spread out. So you can call it a food forest if you like. It's going to be all over the place with the food. And then veg beds mixed in with that, and a polytunnel, all blending from the shelter. But we're interested in wildlife as another thing as well. So biodiversity is harm at this, but that's an aside. That's something that comes along the same as soil health. You know, we want it to be productive croft. It's important to us.
Great, thanks, Phil. That leads on quite well to Mike and Claire. I know you're kind of similar in that respect. You've got a lot of different crops and veg and things you're growing, and even a tea plantation, which is very exciting, and plus all your fruit. So maybe you can tell us a bit about all the different foods and crops that you're growing, and how the trees are integrated or sheltering that.
Sure. Well, Claire and I sort of grow different things, so I'll talk about what I've kind of been progressing with, and Claire can fill in with her food growing as well. Our shelter belt, I have to say, we planted mainly on the southwest or the west side of the croft for the southwesterly winds, and it's worked really well. But we've had easterly winds for the last 2 weeks, which have been sort of blasting through. But as well as the trees, we planted a variety of different kind of hedging plants, including gorse as well, kind of carefully managed belt of gorse, which is providing good sort of low-level shelter at the moment for the tea plantation. We've got 450 tea plants, and they've got some windbreak material around them at the moment. In 2019, I grew oats, and this year we grew and harvested those, so they benefited from the shelter. So we've got sort of a mixture of field-grown crops and raised bed crops. And this year we grew a lot of potatoes, carrots, swede, kale, things like that.
Yeah, so we like so we've actually used a shelter and hedgerow to kind of protect pretty much all of our growing, because wind is the big kind of killer when you're growing veg, apart from all the wildlife that's going to eat it, the voles and the geese and everything else, and deer if you've got deer. Luckily we haven't got deer on Lismore, we've got a few, but it's a real labor of love and a real challenge, and as long as you're up for a challenge, you learn as you go along. But the thing about tree planting that I just wanted to say was I knew very little about trees, but I did read this little leaflet before we started planting, and it said, look around in your location and look what grows well. And I looked around and thought, what grows well? And we thought, all right, so we're going to mimic, because we wanted to increase the biodiversity and the natural environment of and also protect the cultural and historical special landscape of Lismore. So what we didn't want to do is stick a load of trees in that never lived there anyway, because it just felt wrong. So that's what we did. So we used a lot of local provenance. So we used Knott trees, and we have used Albert trees when we've been the Woodland Trust, but we looked very carefully at the provenance of the trees that we were planting. And then we've got a little area that Mike had in his original vision of the Croft, which is like a little arboretum with a little bit of space. So we have a few specimen trees, but the majority of it is native broadleaf and some evergreens. And we put some Scots pine, because there was some evidence that there was Scots pine at one point on Lismore. But importantly, things like I looked at mountain ash, rowan, so we put them up on the hilly bit. The most windy aspect has the rowan, and they love it up there, and they grow really well. So they're kind of like 8 years old now, and they're way above our heads, really tall and just like stunning. Because I said to Mike at the beginning, it'll take years, we'll never see a woodland on this crop, and he was like, no, it'll be all right, Claire. So we looked after, when we first put the original trees in, I really looked after them like they were my little babies. So I stripped all the soil back, put it in really carefully, put the vole guard on, put the tree guard, and we had a drought that year. And the first year that we planted the 1,500 trees around the shelter belt, we had to water, and to buy hoses and water it, because the grounds were cracking and the soil was all open. So be ready for all sorts of challenges, but be persistent and look after your trees like they're your little babies that are going to grow strong and tall. Because if you don't at the beginning, they will struggle. As I said, you make mistakes, of course, but if you look after them, and Mike said they spend a couple of years sticking down their roots and getting used to the environment themselves and what kind of wind there is, and you just got to be a wee bit careful with the tree guards as well, because if you leave them on too long, then they get they kind of start getting a bit weak. So there's lots and lots of things to think about with tree planting, but it's certainly worth it if you look after them.
Yeah, and I would say there's no perfect way to plant trees. I mean, we've tried different things on the Croft, and they've been successful in certain ways and not successful in others. So the kind of you really have to keep trying different things and develop what's right for your area.
And obviously, blatantly obvious things like, where does willow want to grow? Well, where do they grow? So you want to look at your specimen trees and think, well, where did it, like I said about the rowan, and also the soil depth is critical. So if you've got lots of good deep soil, your tree will grow well there. And if you've got shallow soil, it will be a quarter of the size of your tree in deep, rich soil. So that's okay, as long as you know that's what you're doing. If you're planting on shallow soil where it's rocky, your trees will grow much more slowly, and if they're exposed, they will as well. So that's fine, but just think about, okay, well, what do I want here, and how much of shelter belt do I need here, and do I want big trees here, and what do I want there? But it doesn't really matter. Like Phil said, you can have a random display, but you will struggle if you don't think a little bit about what a tree wants. What does this specific tree like? So obviously, if we've planted a lot of alders in wet areas, they don't mind the wet. Willows obviously like the water. However, cautionary tale with the willows, don't put them completely into just a watery bog, because they don't like too much water either. So they need to be watery, but not too much, because we made that mistake, and they don't like being in too much water. So there's lots of things I could tell you about. Damn it!
Okay. I'm gonna pass over to Phil with a question that I've been wondering is just about how do you balance natural regeneration and supporting woodland or trees to regenerate on the land with tree planting? Like how have you made decisions around that? Are there areas you've fenced off and are protecting for succession or?
So our croft is entirely deer fenced, and that's advantages and disadvantages. I'd say a massive advantage when you're just trying to grow things horticulturally. We are surrounded by red deer here. We're an attractive place for deer to come in. Things like the apple trees, I think they must smell like a chip shop takeaway or something. It's just like they just drift in on the breeze. And when we have had deer in, that's what they gravitated to was like the kind of the richer trees as it was. With having a deer fence and having no stock, the ground is extremely rank. It is a very difficult and challenging ground to come into. It's 10 years of that. And so all we've been doing is mechanical means of opening it up a little bit. So we still haven't had stock because of the extra trees we keep planting in. We could compartmentalize it, potentially put electric fences and things, but it's quite a faff at the moment. We're just getting an extra pulse of trees in and then looking at stock after that. And that means the ground is very mossy. In a lot of places, it's quite rank, quite tall grasses. Now we're managing our meadow areas very nicely, but we're not aiming for trees in those areas. So those areas we do get some regeneration, but we don't want it there. The rest of the areas where it's quite tussocky, there's not much regeneration at all. You also need the seed source, and our trees now, the oldest ones are about 15 years old, and so they are seeding like mad. So the pioneer species, alder, willow, pine, that's the age when they really start to throw seeds out, and they're airborne seeds or waterborne seeds. And it's just, you see when the willow's in seed now, all these 15-year-old willows, it's just fluff in the air. It's like candy floss flying through it. It's just so much. And any ground disturbance, particularly near wet areas where there's exposed mud, it's quite damp, they just take and they just root straight through. So of that age now where we wouldn't need to plant anymore beyond this and manage it. And our aspen trees, they're of the age as well. We've only got a few on the croft. I don't know whether there were more planted or not, but I just know of 3 kind of ones that were in the planting. And now they're sprouting and suckering themselves. So they get to an age as well. I know one where I was brush cutting, I was clearing, and I nicked the root there. And they're very surface. It was like cables that basically lay just a few inches under the surface. And that caused it to sprout like mad, but it caused the whole tree in every direction of its roots to sprout. And one aspen, because aspen likes sun, it doesn't grow in shade very well. And yet the other aspens, which has had no interference whatsoever, is put on about 30 suckers, and it's under shade, but it's put on about 1.5 meters of each of those. And they weren't there last year, so they've just gone mad. So it's quite a balance with that. You're going to get the pioneer species coming in, and of course, if you want oak and hazels and things like that, you're going to have to physically get the nuts in the ground if you don't have the seed source there, if it's not an airborne seed. So for now, we're just planting and see where it goes from there.
And Phil, can you tell us a bit more about which apple or fruit tree varieties you have as well?
There's not many suppliers in Scotland, and there's a lot of people out there for advice, more of kind of an English or kind of Scottish borders thing, really. That's where the majority of fruit trees go. So there was a couple of websites I checked in on and got some advice from there, and was given some trees recommended from that. I was trying to think of the different mixes. Discovery apple particularly does really well here. Sunset apple is another one. Arthur Turner, Keswick codling. They're all kind of different. Some are eaters, some are keepers, some are dessert apples and things. But to be honest, I've got a feeling if you got the right amount of shelter and the trees are looked after well enough, you could probably get anything. Now, whether you want a regular crop each year, that is another question. We've got pears, we've got medlars, we've got successful growing of medlars as well. I don't think there's anyone else in Skye with those. That's kind of like of the rose family. It's a very unusual fruit indeed. Cherries, plums. We're trying basically. We'll go with it. Now, as I said, trees can be expensive. The fruit trees can be expensive to put in if you're just buying them at a height, and that is a risk. Just sticking them in the ground like that, they can just perish for whatever reason as well. It's quite an expensive investment. They're kind of 10 times more than other trees. So I'm now growing on a lot of my own and getting in rootstock as well, and going down the grafting route to take the next level. So from the ones I know are going to do well, I can graft from my own varieties. There's not many skills in this area for that, and we could do with some more training courses and things. So that's going forward. I'd like to be involved in that. But for now, all the fruit trees are thriving. Whether they're going to be fruiting year in, year out consistently, I don't know. But most of them are only 3 or 4 years old, and by horticultural rights, we shouldn't really be cropping them yet anyway. We should be just kind of like having a few fruit on them and letting them keep putting on their roots and develop. But I just want apples.
Great. I'm wondering if Mike and Claire, you can talk a bit more about how you went about planning and designing where you were going to put different things. I don't know if Anna maybe wants to share a map of the croft, because you've got some lovely designs that kind of illustrate all the different areas, and you could maybe talk us through that just a little bit, and talk to us also about fruit varieties if you want to let us know which ones have done particularly well. Anna's trying to share, so you just go ahead and fire away. And oh, here we go.
That's an overview of Lismore, and we're sort of in the center. There's a little red square. I think it might be a bit small for people to see. Well, we started off by creating this sort of 10-meter shelter belt strip around 2 sides of the fields, which are in front of the croft, and which are the ones that we would, which we're using for growing. And then we looked at sort of areas that we wanted to create a woodland that was close to the actual cottage. So we then moved across to the sort of east end of the land. Basically, our croft is a big rectangle. It's completely rectilinear with walls on 2 sides, a road at the bottom, and cliffs at the north side that look across to Morven. So we chose, in fact, we probably planted the next trees on reasonable quality land. But then in the last sort of 2 years of planting, we have sort of changed tack a little bit and we were looking at the woodland sort of distribution on the island, and it runs, there's a limestone, that the island is mainly limestone, and there's a ridge that runs all the way up the center of the island. So all the sort of angle from sort of southwest to northeast, all the rock and all the ridges run in that direction. So we've planted a strip or an area that sort of follows that. And we've also fenced off the cliff area where there's Atlantic hazelwood that has managed to hang on basically because it's not been grazed. And now that we've fenced it, regeneration is starting to take place. A lot of blackthorn and willow and a few birch, and actually some aspen, some original aspens have started to sucker into the area as well.
What about your fruit varieties? Your apple tree varieties?
Yeah, fruit varieties.
Yeah, and I don't know if you can jump forward to one of the images of the croft plan itself. I'm just seeing the map.
Yeah, I mean, I should have got a list. I think we've planted about 60 different apple, pear, cherry, and plum varieties. But I would absolutely back up Phil that Discovery and Katie, Red Devil, have all done pretty well. Probably Discovery is the easiest and it's the sweetest. We've also planted other, there's a russet that has done well. One tree that hasn't done well has been Bloody Plowman, which really I've just planted because I like the name. But there are some amazing varieties that are small but incredibly kind of scented. Can't remember the names off the top of my head, but I can always look them up and distribute it after the event.
We use John Hancock's to get our apple trees and we really into heritage tree varieties, so tried to plant those sort of varieties, and ones that, you know, Fruit and Vegetables of Scotland books are really useful for that, like fruit that will grow well in Scotland. Things that will be salt tolerant as well if you're near the sea. It depends what you're, you know, if you we can suffer quite a lot from salt wind, so you do need to plant stuff that is salt tolerant to a certain extent, unless you're going to properly protect it, but you can't protect it completely. So that's kind of quite important, because you'll be sort of like disappointed if you spend a lot of money. Like Phil said, they're very expensive fruiting trees, and they also suffer quite a lot from just snapping. They'll just snap in the wind, and they're not gonna fruit up in a lot of wind either. Like most veg and fruit, it doesn't grow above a certain amount of wind. So you need to bear that all in mind when you're thinking, what do I want to get from this?
Great. And do you produce enough fruit to actually in future sell it, or is it mostly for home consumption?
Well,
Yeah, I mean, we could sell some of it, but we tend to try and freeze it, and we make a lot of jam. And yeah, I mean, I've still got loads of blackcurrants and stuff in the fridge. I mean, storage. If I don't know about you, Phil, but I mean, proper knowing how to store apples over the winter and keep the mice away and all the rest of it. It's all about, you know, and stopping them from going. If you're going to store them for a while, stopping them from going off. It's all farmers know all about this sort of stuff, but you know, it's a trial and error thing. So some of our apples went off because they had a blemish on them or something. So I've learned to use all those up in, like, making apple butter. And so you've got to have really good fruit to store it without it kind of perishing, you know.
yeah. I mean, the trees are, I mean, they're only probably 3 or 4 years old, but some of them are producing a reasonable amount of fruit. So, I mean, my concern is how we're going to deal with the fruit in years to come, potentially. And so storage and selling, I mean, really our croft, like many, is probably more to do with subsistence, and the selling and supplying to local food markets of the excess. And so, and it's the management of that excess. It's better to sell it and find people who want it, rather than trying to store all of it, because we've got 300 kilos of potatoes, and we've actually built a sort of lean-to shed on the gable, so it gets some of the heat from the building. But I've had to put in a bit of heating over the last few days just to stop them freezing. So produce and growing it is one thing. Storage is another whole thing to get involved in.
But the hawthorns that we've grown and the rose hips are just fantastic for making all sorts of rose hip. You know, I don't use syrup anymore, but bought. I can just make bottles and bottles of rose hip syrup, which has such a lovely taste to it compared to like your syrup that you buy from a shop, you know. And there's so many. I've made Horde ketchup. I'm sure lots of people who are on this Zoom are doing the same, you know, experimenting with all sorts of things. But there's just so much that you can do when you've got a nice big, and yeah, we've got some sea buckthorn as well growing that can get out of control if you're not careful. So you've got to watch it with the sea buckthorn, but it's a fantastically voracious tree. Yeah, I mean, there's so much to do with fruit, but if you get your hedges in quick, hawthorn, blackthorn, you know, rose, dog rose, gelder rose and stuff, they grow pretty flipping quickly, and then all of a sudden you've got all this fruit that you can share with the wildlife. Because certainly if you're into the whole thing of what your croft actually represents to the planet, which is really where the heart of it is for me, is how does it you know, what contribution does it make to the planet? You know, you get so many more birds and stuff coming along, and you just increase the natural biodiversity of the whole place by planting trees that can feed them in the winter and also help them they've got somewhere to nest as well. So you also get a load of voles, which is an absolute nightmare to discuss. That's our biggest challenge. You've got deer, Phil, we've got voles. They've had a mast year this year.
Voles the size of deer.
Yeah, well, so speaking of wildlife and biodiversity, Phil, I know you're very keen on biodiversity and have done quite a lot of surveying and observation of what's been happening. So how have the trees and what changes have you seen on the croft through trying to increase your biodiversity and through the tree planting?
So I've got a background in wildlife and conservation. I've always been interested, so it's been great able to watch a piece of land really intensely. So it already had some trees on it, and I remember when we looked around the croft on the day we looked around it, there was sedge warbler singing, there was grasshopper warbler singing, willow warbler singing. It's just like for a bird watcher, it's just a good start to have her outside the window, you know, because they're around in our area, but to have them on the heart of Crofts was unusual. And what we're seeing really as the trees mature is kind of natural succession really. Even now 10, 12, sort of 15 years old, so the oldest tree is just 15, but we're already getting spotted flycatchers, and we're getting black caps, and these are like deep woodland birds. You know, we've recorded tree pipit on the croft. It's just year on year we seem to be getting more and more willow warblers year on year, so the bird life is fantastic. We see 5-6 cuckoos at a time. They seem to, and not just flying over, they seem to be using the croft for finding the big hairy caterpillars to eat, and plenty of meadow pipits for them to pronounce. So we're doing well for those. And then obviously all the raptors and things that are coming in. We've got a lot of voles as well. We could talk about this as a pest species, but that brings owls and buzzards and things. And we've got pine martins, foxes, otters, a range of stuff. So there's plenty on that side of things. And then the smaller stuff as well. I do a lot of moth trapping, so I've been interested in moths for a very long period of time. So in terms of butterflies, for example, I think I've recorded like 9 or maybe 10 species in 5 years. So that's par for the course here. You know, we're not in the richest part of the country. There's only 50 odd species in the UK. Moths, I'm up 225 species, and that's with light trapping. So I set a light at night. It's a special trap where they can come in. Out of those 225 species, over half of them are tied to wooded plants and things. So if I set the same trap on grassland, a few hundred meters away, I still get a lot of moths, more moths from grassland and heather and things like that. But here I have those species as well as all of the woodland stuff. And of course, as the trees get bigger, the surface area it's exponential. It's just huge number. And all those caterpillars, of course, that are out there, great food for the birds and all the cascade of that. And as well as that is all that extra wildlife, is all the nutrients that are being cycled. It's all the micro things we just don't understand. But if you've got let's say we've got 45, 50 pairs of birds nesting on the right, it could easily have that. I mean, it's chock-a-block with the willow warblers and blue tits and great tits and gold crests and things. That's a lot of nutrients being cycled. It's on a very small scale, but it's still doing a job. And then the plant life as well, most definitely increased and diversified. So a lot of the work with the meadows is quite easy. You can have meadows and trees. That's quite easy. We'll talk about that a bit later as well. But the leaf litter and the turnover in the ground seems to change the flora. It gives plants opportunities in lots of areas, feeds lots of other plants, and gives other plants, just a new way in, a niche to come in as well, most definitely. So great plant diversity. We've had a full botanical survey, but we've got a lot of things that we don't see in our township at all.
Yeah, and can you talk just briefly about the sort of multifunctional aspect of some of the trees? Because I know you're planting alder in order for nitrogen fixation and maybe pollarding as well, and all kinds of different, maybe potentially wood products. Or could you tell us a bit about other uses and functions of the trees? Yeah,
so as I said at the outset, I don't want to live in a tall, dark, dense woodland, harbouring midges for the rest of my life. I don't want that. And you think, well, with trees, they grow and they grow tall. Our tallest ones are 6 meters tall, and they're bolting as this is their time. For the first 5 years, it's just like nothing much is really happening. If you can give them a bit of love, you can get a bit of bolt. Some trees do go for it, but on the whole, some you just look at and think, you poor thing, it's not going to make it. And then they go. They really just go. They're just getting established, getting their roots in. Species like alder and willow, they're just absolutely fantastic. They grow very, very well here on wet ground. They thrive on the wet ground here. The right kind of willow. I hear pleasant about the willow. We have eared willow on wettest areas, and then the grey willow and the bits in between. They're both native to the area. We've got some goat willow, which is like taller, single-stemmed, but more standard trees. All of these trees can be worked. So if you don't want to lose your view, if you don't want to lose your sunlight, and you want to minimize the amount of shade you've got, if you want the wood products, then all of these trees can take a cut wherever you want. If you want to cut them to the ground and do a coppice, you can do that. Obviously, if you've got stock, then there's a consideration there. What we're doing to future-proof it is to pollard it, so to cut it above ground level. And for me, it's about chest height also. So if we're going to get stock, any of the regrowth in future, although we don't have stock now, in the future would be at a safe level, and you can continually crop that, and the tree would just keep coming. And it does, it just keeps coming. And alder and willow in particular take that very well. Birch, not so much. Pines and things, if you take the top off, they don't like it very much. It doesn't usually kill them, but they then put one of their side branches into being a leader, and it doesn't look so great. Whereas the alder and willow will just go crazy and just bush out. They'll self-thin out, and with that you can do lots of things. You can have firewood. We're self-sufficient in our own firewood now. We could do wood chip mulch, which is something we're going to be getting into, I think, for making our own compost and taking forward our horticulture. So just using our trees, just milking them basically for their nutrients as such. We've looked at biochar. I know that's been touched on in a few areas where you kind of, it's not quite charcoal, it's more of a different type of charcoal for soil improvements and securing carbon long term. Not sure on that yet, and we might look into that. And then tree hay and things like that, where you can actually just crop the branches, dry them, and then feed them to animals later on in the year. And they retain a lot of their nutrients, I understand, and it's good forage. If you give animals free choice over everything, they'll go to certain trees at certain times of year. They self-medicate and such, and whatever they need. You can kind of control that even better. And it doesn't compromise the ground underneath. Of course, you can manage the tree as it's up there. So it doesn't have to be either or. It doesn't have to be grazing or trees. It can be both. And of course, once you cut the top off it, for the next 4 or 5 years, like floods in, the ground floor changes, grass goes crazy. And if you want to have regeneration, if you want to underplant other trees around that in that time, we do holly for that. So areas where we do want to screen, just plant things like holly. They'll take the shade when it does come up, and they'll grow quite slowly. But when they grow up, they'll be a nice, thick, dense screen. So most definitely multi-purpose. Very few of our trees will get to full height here. That's not a threat to them. Such that they'll live for centuries. Coppicing and pollarding doesn't do much harm to them at all if you do the right species at the right time, in the right way. You've got them for life and for the next generations too.
Great, thanks, Phil. Well, I want to move on to questions from the audience pretty soon, but maybe we'll just finish the conversation off with any top tips you have about getting started for those people that haven't started, even lessons learned or something you really wish you knew when you were starting out, and that you would do differently. Mike and Claire, can you think of something in your top tips?
I know it's a hard one because I think, it's a continuous learning process, but because we've always had animals on the croft, learning to do fencing ourselves saved us a lot of money, and that was quite a good skill to learn. I think we've planted trees in a number of different ways. I think one of the things that we wouldn't do, again, we used mulch mats, plastic woven mulch mats, but they've become a bit of a nightmare. They shred in the wind, and we've actually got some that we've never taken out their packaging. So that's something I would avoid. We did planting straight into the ground with notches, and then that involved quite a lot of effort to keep the weeds down around the trees. So the recent planting we mounded it by hand. That was great from a weed point of view because it gave us 2 years really of weed-free area around the tree. And Claire had been saying about soil depth. So we've noticed an amazing difference in growth rates between areas in deeper soil and areas on, the rockier areas. So we did it to increase soil depth, but unfortunately this year, so there's 2 years along the line with longer grass, the vole population has gone absolutely crazy, and they've actually been burrowing into some of these mounds. And it's been a bit disheartening because we've had 2-meter high trees already that are now just lying on the ground and have been eaten through. So I think you're just going to have to accept losses, and things won't go according to plan.
I think one of the things that was a happy kind of revelation to me was I got asked to take some rescue hens, and I had never had any wildlife or anything like that because I'm vegan. So I hadn't really thought about doing that, but my daughter asked me to take them, and I got them from Perth, and I ended up with these 50 rescue hens. Now, that was really nice because it made it really happy that, they have a big croft, but we put them in the shelter belt. And this is a really, I'm sure some of you who've got hens know all this. So sorry sorry that granny sucking eggs and stuff. But basically, they just literally completely cleared the trees are about a meter. They were just under the trees in the shelter belt, scratching and clearing all the weeds. And that helped the trees immensely because they didn't have any competition from thick, horrible grass. And the chickens just cleared it, absolutely loved it. And you can move your chickens then to another big area of space. So you don't have to contain your chickens. You can let them run down the whole length of the shelter belt and all the way around. And we did that in different areas. And it was just amazing because the chickens were really happy. And actually, they're a woodland bird as well. So it's like you see chickens. Let's not go there. But anyway, they're woodland birds, so they like being under trees and they love scratching. And that combo is really good. So if you want to get some rescue hens, get the rescue hens, and then help them have a nice life, and they help you. So it's good karma.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Phil, have you got any quick lessons learned or things you would totally do differently, or advice you would give?
I totally agree with that. What's been said before, I think hens absolutely work well for us. We have hens, and they just spend their days just scratching around. Their food demands are very, very light, and they just thrive in this natural situation, leaf litter and raking through, like the shade. We've got ducks as well. They like going into the woods, particularly the wet woods, and not too much into the deep cover and things, but great situation for them going forward. And we've not had issues with avian predators or anything. We've got eagles. Well, I had a white-tailed eagle just this afternoon, very low over here, but we've never had any issues with them kind of coming down. I know some people potentially have more open situations. Again, I agree with the voles. Voles are a difficulty. We've planted, so out of our 3,000 trees, 1,700 have come with the Woodland Trust, and 1,300 I've grown myself. I grow a lot of trees, and I think that's an enjoyable experience as well. As you say about getting out in your local area and finding what grows. Don't just find what it grows with permission and doing it properly. Grow them on yourself as well. Get the actual seed stock of where you are. Otherwise, you could end up stuff from East Scotland, from England. We've got rounds on the Croft in the mountain ash. The native ones, which have been dropped by the birds, and they can see it because they leaf up at the same time as all the other ones round here. They come into leaf 6 weeks after our planted rounds come in. And then the flowers only just come in when the others are already setting berries. It's a completely different time. And the planted ones, which are probably of an eastern stock, maybe Eastern Scotland, say Edinburgh area, they look all quite straggly. They're growing, they're still producing berries and things, but they look quite straggly. A lot of dead wood within that seem to be affected by the salt in particular. A lot of kind of poor growth at times. Whereas the local ones, no issues whatsoever, not a single scorched branch, and much richer in berries. So local provenance, and if you can, just grow your own. It's great fun. It does take a long time in some cases, but worth covering.
Claire, yeah, do you want to come in?
Top tip: connect with your community. There'll be people around you who want to help you. Mike and I could not have done what we've done without the help of seasoned crofters who really want to help you, even if they don't agree with tree planting, which a lot of crofters don't, but let's not go there either. They still want to help you if you're genuine and passionate and you're a bit green and you want help wherever you live or whatever you get. There will be people in your community who are absolute gold dust, and it's connecting with that community. And for the future, we need strong, resilient communities at local level. That is really, really critical. And I keep missing that because we're thinking about, growing trees and blah, 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 blah. But actually, the people around you are your greatest asset in many ways. That, we came to Lismore immediately. One of the crofters, younger, she was young at the time, said, "Oh, I'll show you how to get a post in," and taught us how to originally do some fencing. Before, Scottish Crofting Federation are amazing. They do great courses. They're cheap. They're great community. So I would really shout out for Scottish Crofting Federation. Really good. And we've done courses there. We learnt to dry stone wool there. We learnt how to do fencing there. We did lime mortaring there when we were renovating. So that's the other tip. Top tip, get connected.
Great, thank you, Claire. That's a perfect way to end this particular bit of the conversation. But let's pass over to Anna, and I think we've got quite a few questions come in. So do you want to tell us what our top questions are?
Yeah, it's not bad actually. Everybody has been quite active both in the chat and the questions. I think that for the first question, which involves questions around sheep, I'm going to start by trying to bring Iona and Lynn back into the conversation because I think they might help us. But while we wait, I'm just going to cheekily go to the second most voted question. The third actually, because the second is people are asking for a photo of the gorse for tea plantation protection, which might be needed afterwards. So we might ask you to send us one and send up in the follow-up email. So just to make sure that we have that. But I see that Iona is there. So maybe Iona, you can help us with this question in case Phil, Claire and Mike are not that comfortable because it has to do with sheep. And the question is, how do you protect young trees from sheep when planting within a pasture? Because they don't want lots of fenced off bits with long grass swamping the trees, but rather the sheep among the trees. So who is brave enough to attack that question, if anyone?
What I've seen is you do need to give them quite a wide area. There's quite a few different models. You can kind of build wooden structures around it. That's quite expensive if you're just doing individual trees. Of course, that's kind of a lot of the models out there in agroforestry. You'll see that it is individual standard trees in fields. So that's quite an intensive and quite expensive way of doing that. But until they're bolted in a way, I think there's not much other choice. I've seen other kind of metal guards that can stand around it as well. But bear in mind that sheep also will girdle as well. If there's not so much for them to eat, then they will go in for the bark, and they can strip the bark to a point where it can kill it as well. They can just scratch away and cause damage there as well. So I don't know if there's any cheap and easy options apart from electric fencing. I know we talk about electric fencing. Depends how your sheep are, what kind of sheep you've got. A lot of folk use that as well around individual lines, say a fast growing things like willows. Maybe they could do it over a couple of summers if they're in one pasture or the other. It really depends on the situation. But sheep and trees in those first few years are quite a difficult balance.
Iona.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Phil said there, but I think one of the other things that we've tried and had some success with is actually putting trees in tubes and double staking them. It requires quite a lot of maintenance and a lot of monitoring and checking, but it can work if you use the thicker stakes and double stake them. But you're really only going to get protection probably for the first 2 or 3 years with that. But electric fencing is another really popular one. I think it's quite, but again, a lot of monitoring involved in it.
I would second the electric fencing, but that's because I work with lots of mob grazers who are very on it with the electric fencing and also doing it with sheep. So I would say that is your best bet and the least labour intensive actually, compared to trying to guard the trees themselves. But that's just me throwing.
Perfect. Let's move to the next question, which is, this is more a question just as a general question for crofters, not necessarily about trees, but it's quite voted and people seem to be quite keen to know about it. What would you say is the best way to get a croft as a young person without much finance? Phil, do you want to come in because you've been going through?
There are events, I believe, the next couple of weeks on accessing crofts that have been shared out on social media. Maybe we can put that in a link or in a chat somewhere. I think there's a new event launched tonight. I think the first one was oversubscribed, so that's out there. It is tricky. We bought our croft as kind of a going concern, really. You know, with a business of the self-catering within it. And a house on there as well. So that was our kind of business and moving for that basis. But my part of Skye, the property prices and the croft prices for plots is through the roof. It's a very difficult market out there. There is a register of crofts that comes out. I think you have to contact the Scottish Crofting Federation. You can get onto the register of crofts, and that puts it out. That's almost like an estate agent's brochure, really. They just seem to go very quickly, but that's there. And then speaking to local folk on the ground as well, because there could well be a lot of crofts that just aren't on the market and not being used and things. Whether the Crofting Commission change their kind of their enforcement in future years, I don't know, because you're supposed to be putting your croft to purposeful use, wherever that may be. Of course, trees is purposeful use, but a lot of areas are abandoned, but it doesn't seem to be any kind of change there. So it'd be nice to get the land worked and used, definitely.
All right. I think there's a list for woodland crofts as well. I think, again, all these things are heavily subscribed, but there is I think a separate woodland croft organization or register. But I mean, we've had numerous young couples, you know, with young families looking, you know, land, looking at what we're doing and wanting to emulate it. And I think there's, you know, the only way we were able to buy a croft, so we're croft owners, and I think Phil, sounds like you must be the same, which I think is a minority of crofts. I think obviously by far the most are tenanted, and the only way we were able to do that was because we've been working, and we did it later, you know, in our 40s. And the disadvantage of that is crofting is hard work, and you know, you need energy, and it really should be very much available for youngsters to get involved in, and bring, you know, families to remote areas, support local services.
But you know, the elephant in the room is it costs money. And if you haven't got any money at all, you need to find a rich relative who wants to help you out to get some land, or you get a tenancy. If you're lucky enough to get a croft tenancy, fantastic. But there's no doubt about it. And I always say this to people: we haven't been out. We have put we wanted to spend money on the planet, and that's where the value. That's where the gift is for me. I'm not interested in having a fancy computer. I'm interested in having loads of trees. So it's depending where you see the value. So we spend like our money on Scotia wild seeds because we love having loads of flowers all over the place. They're expensive. So for example, for my birthday, I always ask for seeds. That's what I ask for, organic seeds. I don't want anything else. I don't want to damage the planet. I just want seeds. So you can get around it, but you need some money, I think, to start off. If you're lucky enough to get a little bit of land and you can plonk a caravan on, that's what a lot of people start off doing. They'll have a mobile home or a little caravan, and they don't have water. So Mike and I, when we got this croft, it was completely derelict. We didn't have heating in this croft until
2 years ago.
2 years ago. Okay. And we had a soil floor, wind rushing through under the eaves. It was pretty brutal, actually. You know, I can remember chopping wood at 5 degrees on a soil floor in this croft, which is now really cozy because it's got underfloor heating from an air source heat pump. But these things take time. But if you've got passion and you love it, just go for it. And if you're youngish, you will put up with it. You get used to it. You just put thick coats on, and it's all part of the exciting adventure, you know. And it's more satisfying if you've had to work hard at it. So you might end up in a caravan for a few years. So before, even if you can get the land, try and get yourself a bit of land if you can.
Yeah,
I know that's easy to say.
I'm not completely up to date with the legislation, but there is new hutting legislation, and there's the 1,000 Huts campaign. So it is possible, if you've secured the land, to, you know, have a dwelling that is 30 square meters, and it doesn't have to go through all the same legislation as a house.
You could look at the hutting Bernard Planterose, who is a bit of a amazing person, guru. Yes. Reforesting Scotland's a great organisation to support and be part of. Another, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. There's also lots of people just sharing ideas in the chat and sharing ideas, also answering over the questions. We'll make sure to include that in the follow-up email, just for everyone to have it. Questions keep on coming, so let's see what the next one is after the goers. It's there's a lot of interest in knowing which pieces of trees may grow well in Shetland or any other place where there are gales, and more gales. So, Iona, do you want to start with that one?
Yes, I would. If you're in Shetland and you want to plant trees, I would very strongly recommend you get in touch with the Shetland Amenity Trust. They operate the Croft Woodland project, which is the project I work on. They do that in Shetland, but the people who work there have got lots of experience of establishing trees on Shetland, and they have their own little nursery as well. So absolutely get in touch with them.
Phil, do you want to touch? I see that Claire looks like she's about to either answer or comment something on the chat, so I'll pass it on to her.
Oh no, it's just somebody put gales, being a bit typically Scottish, probably.
No, I think
Gale.
It's probably the Latin American like pronunciation. I'm going to blame it on myself. Phil.
So saltwater winds are definitely a problem, but you can just go out and see what's growing in your local environment as well. As I said, local provenance is vital. So our area here on Skye is province 104, and there are no tree nurseries within that area. So you then got to look at the next neighbouring ones going out. It's kind of 105 and things. There's still not much down on the whole, so there's not a huge amount over on the west coast available. The Woodland Trust has access to what is available, which is great. That does make a difference to salt and gales, absolutely, having the right provenance there. And then it's the density of getting them in as well. So the kind of shelter breeds shelter, and they can kind of all grow up together. Individual trees on their own get blasted from all sides. If you're planting kind of en masse, doesn't matter if there's losses within that. Of course, you kind of they grow as a unit and stand as a unit, and you can thin out afterwards if you so wish, or kind of keep it as a shelter belt going forward. But of our trees here, I wouldn't say any of them really suffer. We're not fully exposed, but just going around the coast on the other side of the hill, the downy birch, the holly, the oak, they don't seem to really suffer. You know, the local provenance stuff there. Yes, there's some funny shapes. We've got oaks around here that are like that, but still they continue to survive. If they had more other trees around them, I'm sure they would be more of a normal shape. It's just being constantly exposed and on your own, it definitely makes it different.
There's another question about willows and whether they keep the wet ground wet, and if that's the case, and how to best avoid wet grounds for trees.
I'll take that from my perspective. Yeah. We're on a slope here, as you think, well, that's free drainage it is, but no, we're on quite the top is quite a podsol glaze, it's a very sticky clay ground. You can drain it, and then 2 meters above the drain, it can still be wet. It can hold moisture within that. The wet areas, because of the underlying geology and things, they just stay wet. No, I think it's quite a good use for wet ground. The alders certainly seem to have a good improvement on the drainage. Willows, they probably do have an effect of draining it out, particularly if there's things like iron pans in the soil or compaction grounds within it, because the roots can kind of punch through. There's often a kind of a false soil bottom. You can dig through some of the wet areas of Crofts, and it's not always just bedrock right there. It can be that there's a bit of a false level through to clay or iron or whatever. It could just be compaction or previous actions that have gone on in the Croft. and trees and deep-rooted herbs and shrubs can often just puncture straight through that. It might take time initially. Once they're away, then that lets the water then get further down into it. So it depends on your local site. If it's at the bottom of a valley and it's wet, it might just stay wet. If it's on a slope, it might change it. I suppose case by case. Didn't really answer very well.
I think if you've got really wet ground and you want to try and dry it, then basically alder is a really good one as well. So alder has no stomatal control, so it just keeps pumping water out the ground all the time. And it's incredibly hardy, grows in the most amazing conditions. So anyway, alders, willow, downy birch, that's your key ones for planting on wet grounds.
I thought you were going to say something, Clem. Sorry about that.
I kind of was, but I'm trying not to bring it back to mob grazing again. But just if you manage
bring
your
it back to mob
grazing,
grazing.
well,
Go
it's just
ahead.
it depends if the wet ground, yeah, trees can help, but also your grazing management will affect your water infiltration rates and the rooting depth of your pasture. And having, you know, pasture, even if you're not grazing, if you're doing certain kinds of pasture management and have diversity in your pasture, you're going to really improve the wetness of the soil. So it's not just trees, it's also pasture management, I guess I would say.
Claire, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I can't add to what I said about the three main tree species that will suck up a lot of water, but I did want to say something what I forgot to say earlier, and that was if you we couldn't, on Iona's advice, we cordoned off 6 acres and left it to naturally regenerate, as Mike mentioned earlier. So it started suckering up from the cliffs. However, there is a management of ragwort in that, and that we have to spend time actually pulling up ragwort in quite large quantities every 2 to 3 years. And actually, the cinnabar moth loves it, and it is, you know, hoverflies love it and all the rest of it, but it will spread at quite an alarming rate, as invasive species do. And it's just that you just have to manage some areas like that. You can't just leave it and say, oh, it's nice to have like a wild area, because something will take over, like ragwort, and you can see it on some of the Western Isles where it is a complete monoculture. And whilst I like ragwort and I don't pull all of it up, I pull 99% of it up. I don't pull it up if it's got the caterpillar on it, for the cinnabar moth. If it's actually got the stripe, it's a cinnabar moth, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
I don't pull it up there, but we do spend a week with help, with volunteers. That's the other thing. We can't run this croft without volunteers. We bring in workaways, and they seem to really, so do that as well. If you get yourself a piece of land and you think, God, I'm not going to be able to manage this because I need to earn money as well while I'm doing it, bring people in who want to learn too with you, and they are a great asset. And you're not abusing them; they are learning off you, and you're connecting, and you're having a really good time with these youngsters, and they are a valuable asset too. Couldn't have done it without them.
That's great. Thank you very much. We're going to move to the next question. And there's actually a question around sort of like let me see this one as the next one. So about what kind of strategies are the best for choosing hardwood tree types? Just they've all seen diseases destroy types of tree like the elm, ashes, etc. So how do you lower the species risk? I think that's probably going to go back. Phil?
You've got to diversify. You've got to have a range of species. If you just go all guns out, even on alder or willow, whatever will grow fast, if something comes in, at the moment there's nothing. As you said, there's the different pathogens and things can just wipe tree species out. And we're not sure where ash is going to go in the next few years. And we've got a lot of ash on Skye. We don't have much tree cover on Skye, ancient or native stuff. So we're concerned about that. So you just got to diversify and look what is available locally and just mix it in. And that includes shrubs and things as well. So if you're looking for obviously trees for timber and things, that's one thing, but there's a good shrub layer you can have there as well. People don't often think of bird cherry and Gelder rose and these kind of things as well. They do have value. It wouldn't be much of timber at the end of it, but they serve a very good purpose. And then if it's as hardwoods go, I mean, certainly for quality timber, it's quite difficult to turn from open bare ground that are exposed into quality timber, unless you're managing it for that. Really, I don't think we're ever going to get any kind of good lengths out of it. Wood we can use, wood we can turn, but I don't think we'll be able to kind of get any good kind of hardwood for timber, if you see.
I think in that point as well is you don't really want to kind of like release carbon. So you want to leave your trees in, but if you coppice them, like you say, Phil, or you're using willow, you're not like causing a problem to the environment. But you know, we do need to grow mature trees. You know, we need to be in it for the long haul for the planet as well. So yeah, you might want some trees for something, but you're not going to. Yeah.
I mean, there's various systems for coppicing which have coppice with standards. Certainly, if you've got better ground, growing, you know, good timber trees is important. Oaks, especially, you're not going to see them in your lifetime, but as part of my job, I use oak, and having supplies from any part of the country, I think, is still viable as long as there's good access to it. It's the extraction of large trees that's important. So it needs to be somewhere where you can get vehicles reasonably close so they can actually take away large tree trunks to be sawn. We had a beech behind the cottage which needed to come down. We were worried that it was unstable, and so we had that planked, and it's now been, so the carbon hasn't been lost because it's now planked and it's our kitchen basically. The other thing in terms of trees that are going to sustain into the future, I mean, one of the most robust trees at the moment hasn't been affected by disease is sycamore. I mean, sycamore ash is again the dominant tree on Lismore, and it's extremely sad to see all these mature trees dying back all over the island. So we've included sycamore in our mix. It's already here on the island. It's growing on the cliffs naturally, and it does well in exposed conditions. It does well on limestone as well. It creates a beautiful tree, and it's a useful wood.
Iona, do you want to come in? There we go.
I was going to make the sycamore point, actually. That's a good one. And to start, you know, we can start varying and looking at other species. But I think one of the things that you have to be aware of, particularly if you're planting on crofts that have been grazed for a long period of time, is that the nutrient status of your croft of your soil might not be great. And what you'll probably have to do is introduce a lot of pioneer species initially. And once they're established and your whole nutrient recycling has started, you can then start thinking about introducing a more diverse range of species. So you have to take a very long-term view over it, over establishing woodlands on anywhere, but I would say particularly on crofts.
Super. There's a question for Phil, but that I think that is going to end up regarding everyone, and it's around the case study, and where you said that in order to get a CAS grant, a CAS grant for horticulture, you need to submit a full business plan. Is that something that you have done? And if so, how did it go? Or did you just decide to go down the stock route instead? I think it's a good moment to talk a little bit about grants and how to actually get started with your planting of trees and who to talk to.
I think agroforestry is a new thing, and integrating trees is quite just making the case in point of going to the script agency to talk about these things. I had to explain it very carefully and try to kind of work on it. It's unconventional stuff. We do want to have stock. We do want to have horticulture, but at present, if it's stock or cattle, you wouldn't need a business plan for grants. And we need to replace our deer fence. Our deer fence is 15 years old. We're planting around it. There's still a huge deer pressure here. But our horticultural practices, our fruit trees, were not eligible for that. I'm so concerned about the birch and alder and all those kind of other ones that we're planting. That's kind of like, that's forestry and woodland. That's kind of their argument. That's nothing to do with them. We're looking at the horticultural side of things, and the fruit trees weren't eligible. And I think we're just too honest, really. We didn't want to get down the route of making a business plan that of supplying, say, a local restaurant, a local shop with our fruit, which is only got 3 or 4 years old. We're not going to. We're too honest for that. What we were eligible for, surprisingly, out of all of the things I was putting together, the things we're doing here, and could we get a CAGS grant for different things? Our basketry willow, we do basket willow. We've got beds for that. That would be enough to justify almost 5-figure deer fence and their eyes, which I. Anyway, it's time to change. I'm sure that agroforestry and these kind of topics will be well covered. I know there's shelter belt angles that can come in now under CAGS, I believe, but it doesn't quite work for us. But we're trying to do lots of different things all at the same time. So we're not an easy case study of here's a map, here's what we want to do with this bit here, and this is the reason we want to do it. We were a bit all over the place. So I think it's for me to have a chat with them again in a few months' time. I'd like to hear some positive news on that front. It will be very useful to us.
Iona, do you want to come in? Go ahead.
It's worth pointing out that CAGS is currently under review, and I think it's going to be a bit more trees and woodlands friendly for the next time it's launched. It's been a lot of work being done on it at the moment. But do you want me to do something about? I don't know. Is Lynn left us? Is Lynn coming back or? I can't hear you, Anna, you're muted.
Lynn should be like a sort of like a voice from the beyond, but the image is not working. But I just put her.
Anna, can you hear me just now?
Hey.
Perfect.
Good.
Yeah. So the voice is there, not the image.
Iona, do you want to start and I'll follow on, because we both work really closely together anyway in the Croft Woodland project. So if you want to start, I'll follow on after that. That's all right.
That's absolutely fine. I just wanted to make sure you were still there. That's all. But,
I didn't get rid of me that easy.
Okay, well, so just to quickly introduce myself, my name's Iona Hyde, and I work in the Croft Woodland project for the Woodland Trust. So we operate throughout the crofting countries throughout the whole of Scotland. We were set up in about 2015, and there are 4 of us. There's myself, I cover Argyll, and I also do the project management. We've got Viv Halcrow out in the Western Isles, and I noticed that there was some questions coming up about planting on use and so on. So if you contact their general crofting email, after this, I'll put you in touch with Viv. We've also got 2 new project officers. We've got Gordon Cummings, who covers South Highland, Skye, and the Northern Isles. And we've got Rory Finlay, who's going to be covering North Highland. So as I say, we were set up in about 2015, and our main focus really is to help crofters, but we also work with farmers and smallholders as well. And our main focus is woodland creation, although we do give advice out on woodland management as well. And what we really aim to do is we aim to help you design and deliver woodlands that of all scales. So that's really from just a few hundred trees on the edge of a field up to entire common grazings that meet your own objectives and that deliver a whole range of benefits that to you, to your croft or your farm. So I would say probably that the main focus of what we do is we provide advice. We try and visit every site that we're asked to. And when we're there, we look at the potential for the site, we discuss what your objectives are, and we really decide what's feasible, and then help you try and design a woodland that will basically deliver all your own objectives. We can help you with planting options, we'll help you with decide on things like protection and maintenance, and we can help you with budgets and also to access funding. So I suppose probably funding is the main thing really of interest tonight. So we can help you access the Forestry Grant Scheme. So as project officers, we'll do all the groundwork. We'll actually look in to see whether a scheme is eligible or not. And once we are confident that it's eligible, we'll engage the services of our professional forestry consultant to help you submit an application. And for that, we pay 80% of the agent's fees, and we ask you to contribute about 20%. We can also help you with CAGS applications as well, and although clearly that has to be something that's relating to either woodlands or hedgerows or individual tree planting. The other thing that I think is worth pointing out, that we actually have a loan fund as well. So for those of you who haven't been through the forestry grant scheme process, once you have your approval, you have to deliver the scheme, and then you claim your grant back. You claim your grant after you've delivered it. So for a lot of people, particularly small scale projects, the costs of it are it's just not achievable. People just don't have the money to be able to deliver that and then claim back. So in partnership with the Community Housing Trust, we actually have a rolling interest-free loan that we can provide, sort of usually up to about 10 loans at a time, up to about £6,000. And as I say, we deliver that through the Community Housing Trust, who is one of our partners in this project. And the other funding that we do is obviously through our own grant scheme, which is Morewoods. Morewoods is a Woodland Trust own tree planting scheme, and we have adapted a hectare, which is about 300 trees usually. That's usually the minimum delivery we'll do, up to about 3 hectares, and really anything beyond that we would probably expect it to go through the forestry grant scheme. Basically, what we like to think is that no schemes are too small, and that really we'll try and find some way to help you. What we don't do through Morewoods is we don't pay for fencing, and we don't pay for ground preparation or maintenance. But what we do pay for is the trees, the guards and the stakes, and the delivery of them to you. And for that we pay 60%, and we ask you to contribute about 40%. I would say it's probably financially less attractive than FGS because we're not paying for the fencing, but it's a much more flexible scheme, and it's very easy to access because we do all the paperwork for you. So it's a very, very simple procedure. And we also operate a more hedges scheme on exactly the same basis, where we pay 60% and you pay 40% of it. So I won't go on any more about the other things that we do through the project, but that's really the main things. And there's obviously more information on our website, and I know Anna's going to send you some more information out afterwards. The only other thing I would say, that for those of you who are not within the crofting counties, the Woodland Trust provides a service across the whole of Scotland, or across the whole of the UK. Please just get in touch with us if you want any more advice on anything, and we'll get back in touch with them. Okay.
Anna, do you want me to come in now?
Yep.
All right. Right. Thanks. Thanks, Iona. I'll keep talking the next while I'm still here. Thanks very much, Iona, for that. As you say, we work quite closely with the Woodland Trust with the Croft and Woodlands project, and we've got quite a good paper written about that, about the grants that are available in the crofting areas, looking at maybe the common grazings and things like that. The forestry cooperation grant is quite good, just even for looking at the possibilities of woodland creation in these areas. We're talking about the crofting areas as well. Look at the native woodlands and target areas. So that's looking at obviously native woodland down to a quarter of a hectare, up to a maximum of a hectare for the Northern Isles, quarter of a hectare up to 3 hectares for the Western Isles, and that kind of thing. So, but I would say as well, if you're speaking to Iona, as you say, she deals with the FGS as well, is speak to your local office, whether it be Highland, Perth, or Argyll, or that kind of thing, and get in contact with them really on when you're thinking about your proposals and what funding could be available, what target areas you might be to get a bit of an uplift in that, because some of these areas do have quite an uplift for certain parts of the country. Another thing just to say about that, we've just put out new guidance for a kind of walkthrough guide for people who want to do woodland creation. That's been really well put together, brings all the certain other bits that you have to look at, like sites and species and what's going to grow, what you have to look at. A lot of what we've discussed tonight, interestingly, what Claire said about having the right tree in the right place and looking round about you, what's actually going to grow and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of detail in that guide, and I'll have that, and I can send a link. The other thing, there was one of the questions was about species that will grow in certain areas, and that we've just done a press release on a crofter in Shetland, Andrew Hall, who has very successfully got his sell into the forestry grant scheme, and it gives details about what's grown for him and that kind of thing. So that's great. That gives you another practical example there. And as I say, just get in contact with your local office, because there is different grants out there, from your native broadleaves to that are quite specific for Northern Western Isles, but that actually covers Orkney, Shetland, the Western Isles, and other places in the Crofting counties. So to see if you're eligible for them, because there is quite considerable grant available for these smaller kind of areas and that kind of thing. And just to say, if you're out with the crofting areas or that kind of thing, there is funding available through the Farm Advisory Service, where you can get up to £1,000 funding to actually get a forestry agent to make up a plan for you and look at that kind of thing and see what's actually feasible for your croft or your farm or your small holding and that kind of thing. And it's really, really easy to apply for, and it gives you that bit of experience that you maybe don't have yourself, that want to just look at certain areas on your farm or your croft or your small holding. But no, there's plenty of options out there within the grant system and probably through the Woodland Trust. So it's just to meet your objectives, we need to marry these things up. And as I say, there is advice there from, let's say, the Woodland Trust, speaking to our woodland officers early on when you've got a proposal, and if you want somebody to have a look round your place and that and just see what's feasible, the Farm Advisory Service is there for that £1,000 worth of grant. It's there and really easy to apply for. So that's about it, I think. But as I say, I'll send the new guidance link to Anna. You can have that. I'll send the FAS stuff through as well. And I say we've got a really good paper that links up with us working with the Woodland Trust. And I know we got through the Highland guide through for the Woodland Trust and ourselves, and that put together. So that's a really good one as well, and that's included in that paper, along with the possibilities for common grazing funding. So I'll stop while I'm ahead before I disappear, and it's been great listening to you when I could this evening, and it sounds wonderful of what you are all getting up to.
Thanks, Lynn. That was brilliant. Thanks, Iona, as well. We're right on time. So before we say bye, I was just wondering if Phil and Claire and Mike wanted to just say one last phrase to get everybody excited about planting trees in their crofts, hopefully, rather than making them terrified about the notion. And after that, we're going to be sharing in Mentimeter, in the same Mentimeter that you've been using. We'll be sharing a short survey. So if you could just fill it on your own time, that would be brilliant. So Phil, to close, last words.
Go for it. Even if it's on a small scale, even for shelter belts, whatever you're doing on your croft, even if it's stock or cattle or various other things, it will provide benefits for the soil health and for local biodiversity. So just go for it.
And I think probably from my point of view, and Claire may have a different view, the most amazing thing, because we didn't really have any trees on the croft, it was purely grazing, apart from these sort of veteran trees near the cottage. I think it was probably about 4 years, maybe even 3, when some of the trees were actually above our head height, and you could actually get that feeling of walking through a wood that you'd created. I think that's a pretty amazing feeling to have.
I just say get inspired, come and visit us. We also built the Lismore bunkhouse. We always say on these things, come and visit us, come and stay, get inspired, come and listen to the pitfalls and the joys and the pains of it, and have a reality check if you like, but come over and see us on Lismore when the lockdown's over. You're all welcome.
Thanks for that piece of hope. I can't wait for that to be the case and for us to go en masse to Lismore. You're going to be so sorry when 140 people are knocking on your door. Thank you very, very much, everyone. As I mentioned, we're going to put together a lot of the conversation in the chat as well. That was really interesting. Lots of the questions that we couldn't answer, we're going to be addressing them in the follow-up email. We're also going to be sharing the contacts for Iona, for Lynn, And thank you so much, speakers. It was like perfect way to spend a Thursday evening in the middle of winter, just discussing crofts and everything. So again, if anybody wants to get in touch with us, please feel free. You can always sort of like reach us on our mails. And if you have more questions, just feel free. This event will be, the recording will be available so as well. You can revisit it as much as you want, or come and see it. And if you see as well, we've shared the link to our resources in a wee box down there that you can click, and you can reach all our resources there. Have a great evening. I hope that you enjoyed the conversation, and I get really excited and ready to plant some trees.
Bye everyone. Thanks so
Bye.
much.
Thanks then. Cheers. Bye.